If you see this yellow shriveled baby cucumber on your vine, you won't have a harvest this year. Yes, you may have flowers everywhere, but your cucumbers are actually dying before they even have a chance. You also might be making one massive mistake that is sabotaging your plants for good. And if you don't know how to read the signs happening right here behind the bloom, your season is over. I'm going to show you the steps you must take ASAP to save your cucumber harvest. Let's start with the part that is throwing you off the most. The flowers. See all these yellow blooms on my cucumber plant here? They're actually lying to you. Now, a flower only means the plant is ready to produce. It doesn't mean it will. That bloom still has to get fully pollinated before the plant commits the massive amount of energy required to actually grow that cucumber. Now, this is where things quietly break down in your garden. You'll see 15 or 20 flowers open, and you think you're about to get a huge harvest, but maybe only one single cucumber actually develops. The plant looks productive, but the fruit never sets. Now, the easiest way for you to catch this early on is to stop watching the flowers and start watching what's happening right at the base of the bloom. If this tiny cucumber stays skinny, turns yellow, or dries up at the tip like this one is here, your plant has already pulled the plug. It's decided the fruit isn't worth the effort. It's not about the flower count, it's about the fruit formation. Now, the fix for this is a tiny 2-hour window every morning that determines if the fruit lives or dies. I'm going to tell you more about that in just a moment. But first, you have to be ready for the high summer temperatures that are coming. Even if it's mild today, like in the 70s, like it is here in Southern California, those 90-degree days are right around the corner. And if you aren't prepared, your soil will be sending a stress message to the roots that will negatively affect your harvest. So let's just talk about the reality of the high summer heat that's coming soon. This is where you are likely losing the battle. And it is a total head game because your plant can still look lush, green, and perfectly healthy, while the cucumbers themselves have completely stopped forming. Now let me show you a cucumber in another area of my garden. The cucumbers here in the chill zone take the brunt of the afternoon heat. We've had some pretty hot days in the 90s lately. And what's happening here is that the high heat is putting massive stress on the plant. When that heat stress happens, the plant shifts into survival mode and the cucumbers simply stop developing. And you can see here, this plant is looking pretty measly and pretty bad. When the temperatures push into the 90s and even the triple digits, the plant stops focusing on producing cucumbers and shifts every ounce of its energy into just staying alive. And a lot of times this happens before the leaves even wilt. So here's the part you don't want to miss. If the heat goes up, but you're still watering on the same schedule you used in milder 70-degree weather, your root zone is drying out faster than you realize. Now, the key here is lowering the stress on the plant because cucumbers absolutely hate the dry, wet, dry soil swing. If the soil is dry one afternoon and soaked the next morning, and then bone dry again by the next heat spike, it sends a signal to the plant to abort the fruit. Now, the fix for this isn't just watering more. The fix is keeping the root zone evenly moist to keep the stress levels down. The fix during a heat wave is to stop watering by the calendar and start watering by what the soil is actually doing. So you want to stick your finger about 2 to 3 inches near the roots. If it feels dry at that depth during hot weather, you have to water more often. If you're hand watering once a day, move to twice a day. Now, if your drip timer is set for every other day, move it to every single morning. In my raised beds here, I use the Mr. Landscaper drip irrigation kit with a timer because it makes this adjustment so simple during hot weather. When that heat stays in the 90s and in the triple digits, not only do I put some shade cloth over my plant to protect the flowers from drying up and dropping off, but I also change how often it runs. So the plant has the water it needs to take it through the stress of the day. I eliminate this wet, dry, wet soil swing entirely. So the plant doesn't feel the heat stress, and this is key, so it can actually grow those cucumbers. Now, if you're growing cucumbers in containers, you definitely need to water more often because they dry out a whole lot faster than in a raised bed. You may need to even water your containers twice a day during a heat wave to keep that root zone from crashing and the stress from spiking on the plant. Now, the beauty of using drip irrigation with a timer is that it handles this for you, so you don't have to babysit your containers with a hose. You just set it to trigger that second watering in the late afternoon. And this prevents the soil from ever hitting that critical dry point that causes the plant to stall out and the fruit to shrivel up. Then mulch around the base of your plant with 2 to 3 inches of clean straw or shredded leaves. You're basically creating a thermal blanket to keep the roots cool during the heat wave. And making this move today means that within a week or two of lowering that stress with steady moisture, you're going to see fewer shriveled up cucumbers and more of them actually sizing up. So you have beautiful cucumbers to eat. You aren't just watering to water, you're keeping the moisture steady so the plant isn't stressed and can give you lots of cucumbers to harvest. Now, if your soil is moist and you've managed the heat, but your fruit is still shriveling up, you're likely missing a very critical window. There's a tiny sliver of time every single morning where your harvest is won or lost. And if you miss this window, the plant pulls the plug, and it doesn't matter how much you water or feed. The cucumber is a goner. Now, the real issue happening for about 2 hours in the morning when nobody is looking, when nobody's out of bed, the cucumber pollen is at its absolute peak. After 10 a.m., the heat makes that pollen very heavy and sticky, and it becomes essentially useless. If the bees aren't in your garden at the crack of dawn, your cucumbers simply won't get pollinated, and that means you won't see a single one grow. Now, this is where sometimes you have to step in and take charge of your garden, especially if you haven't seen many bees around lately. But here's what you might not realize. Honeybees actually don't like cucumber pollen. It actually contains a bitter chemical called cucurbitacin that they naturally try to avoid. The bees actually only visit your cucumbers for the nectar, which is a sweet, sugar-rich liquid they use for energy. If they find a better, sweeter food source nearby, like in my clover flowers on my grass, they will skip your garden entirely. When you hand pollinate, you're making sure the job actually gets done. First, what you need to do, it's very simple, is you need to identify the male flower. Look for the thin, straight stem under the flower. This is your pollen source right here. Next, you're going to find the female flower. Now, this is pretty easy because you just look for a flower where the cucumber is actually kind of swelling right behind it. But here's the catch. The female flower is usually only open for one single day. And if you miss that 24-hour window, that specific cucumber is finished and will not develop. It will shrivel up and drop. Here's exactly how you save the harvest by hand pollinating. It's very simple. You can use a small paintbrush or a cotton swab. Simply find your male flower and dab your paintbrush on the center to get some pollen on it. And then head on over to your female flower where that tiny cucumber is swelling. And then gently but firmly dab your paintbrush on the center of the female flower to transfer the pollen. Now, because new flowers are opening every single day, you want to do this for several mornings in a row to catch every new bloom as it opens. And within 2 to 5 days of doing this, you're going to see those tiny little cucumbers finally start to enlarge instead of dying off. It kind of feels like a little bit of a project, but once the plant starts setting fruit consistently, it's worth it. And it usually ramps up surprisingly fast after doing this. But even when you're hand pollinating or the bees are doing the work for you, there's still one massive mistake you might be making: the nitrogen trap. Now, the nitrogen trap is that massive mistake I warned you about at the beginning. When you see your cucumber stalling out, your first instinct, like mine sometimes, is to reach for the fertilizer and give them a heavy feeding to jumpstart their growth. But adding more fertilizer isn't always the answer. Your plant will respond to lots of nitrogen by pushing out even more vines and more leaves. But your cucumber count isn't going to budge. You'll see everything getting bigger and greener, but you won't be picking anything for your dinner table. What you need to do is wait until you are consistently seeing those healthy, tiny cucumbers enlarging and taking off. And once that happens, that is when feeding really helps to get the production going. What I do at this point is to give my plants a water-soluble fertilizer. And the reason why this is so important is that a water-soluble fertilizer is basically a liquid buffet. The cucumber can uptake those nutrients immediately through the roots. There's no waiting around for weeks for things to break down in the soil. It's like a shot of espresso for your garden that gets to work right now. Now, what I do is I make sure my fertilizer at this point has a solid amount of phosphorus. The middle number on the fertilizer bottle, the 6 here, is your phosphorus or your P. So you think of this as your fruit fuel. It's what tells the plant to stop making leaves and to start making cucumbers. Then you've got the 2 at the end, which is your potassium or your K. Now, your potassium is like the immune system for your plant. It provides the overall strength it needs to stand up to the summer temperature spikes without shutting down. Now, I've been using Monterey Fish and Grow for years because it hits that balance perfectly. Now, I know some of you see that 9 at the beginning, which is the nitrogen number, or the N, and you worry it's going to push a ton of leaves. But here's the thing about the Fish and Grow. It's a specific formulation where it isn't just one super fast hit of nitrogen. Some of it gets to work quickly, but the rest of it feeds the plant gradually over time. You get a steady, sustainable growth instead of a massive burst of leaves that ignores the fruit. Here's a system for feeding that you need to follow if you want to keep picking cucumbers every single day. If you're in raised beds, your soil is going to hold on to those nutrients a lot longer than a container will. So feeding every 10 to 14 days is usually enough to get really good harvests. So all you have to do is mix your concentrate here with water according to the label and then drench the roots. It's that simple. But if you're growing in containers, you have to stay on top of it because you're watering more often in the heat, sometimes twice a day, and the nutrients are literally washing out the bottom of the pot. So you want to move your feeding schedule up to about once a week while your plants are producing heavily. The beauty of a consistent feeding schedule is that it keeps your harvest consistent. Imagine walking out to your garden every morning and seeing a new, dark, beautiful green cucumber ready to pick, instead of struggling with stunted yellow vines. You're not feeding the plant, you're giving it the fuel it needs to keep up with the summer sun. I hope this video answered some of your questions on why you're getting tons of flowers but no fruit. If you make these fixes ASAP, you're gonna have a massive harvest, instead of staring at empty yellow flowers and shriveling tiny cucumbers. I wanna hear from you now. Which one are you going to fix first? I'll be reading your comments and answering your questions below. To keep your garden producing all season long, grab our new summer harvest seed bundle over on our website. It has everything you need to keep your harvest going through the heat, including my favorite variety of cucumber. And for the raw, unedited reality of what's happening in the garden here, mistakes and all, head over to our new second channel, CaliKim Uncut. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time in the garden.